Well, hello there. Do hope you're all well. Well, about 6 days ago, I watched a video from Phil from Different Bias, and he got onto the topic of the government wanting to sell our medical records. And sometimes you've got little things going on in your life, other things happening, and so you had one ear listening to it and my other ear listening to other stuff and whatnot, whatever I was doing. So I didn't really sort of like take much interest. I know it might sound odd and a bit surprising, but you know, that's how life happens sometimes. Well, on Sunday, I was listening to Nick Abbot doing his regular show, and he's talking about whatever discussions he were talking about. Then he had an interview with a guy called Phil Booth. Now, Phil Booth is the coordinator for Med Confidential, and they started to talk about this subject, about the government wanting to sell our medical records. And to say it was quite eye-opening and enlightening was an understatement. So I thought I would record it for you and let you have a listen to it yourselves and see what you think. It's very, very interesting, to say the least.
The government is about to sell your medical records to private companies that want them. That might come as a surprise. You might think that's impossible. They wouldn't dare. They especially wouldn't dare without telling you first. Well, like the notice of world destruction that was posted on another planet in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, they did tell you, but you needed to do a lot of work to read it. To talk about that, Phil Booth is the coordinator of Med Confidential, an organisation which campaigns to keep our medical information confidential. You're fighting a losing battle, aren't you, Phil?
Well, we are fighting very hard to keep stuff consensual, safe and transparent, Nick. I don't say that we have lost, but as you say, they are trying to do their best to get people's GP data without telling them. And
what kind of companies do you think may be interested in that?
So the data that this body, NHS Digital, already collects, which it gets from, say, hospitals and clinics, it sells to a whole range of companies and, researchers in universities and various other things. But some of these are commercial companies. There are things called information intermediaries, which sometimes might be called data brokers. So they get access to the data and then they service other companies like pharmaceutical companies and data and medical device companies. So there's essentially a whole sort of market around NHS patients' data.
And we do know that pretty much the most valuable thing about us these days is the data that we may not even realise that other companies hold on us. I mean, you can sway people to vote for political movements by controlling their and using their data against them, essentially. And that surely is one of the things that people must be most concerned about.
Yes, so this is one of the things, and NHS Digital and the government say, well, we don't sell your data to insurance companies or marketing companies. But if you look at what some of these companies actually are, they are essentially selling what's called market access or market insights. So they may be not directly marketing you, the patient, but they're finding out how to make more money and sell their things into the NHS. So it's sort of, if you like, an indirect influence to make more profit for themselves. And as you say, were this data, this information, which gets, copies of it get sent out to some of these places, were that to ever be compromised, this is fantastically detailed information. Yeah, it might not have someone's actual name or address in it, but it's got things like the things that have happened to you, medical events which may identify you uniquely, and someone would then be able to find out a whole bunch of things about your life. And as you say, that's the business of the world these days, is using data to influence people.
So while the government can say that they don't sell it directly to insurance companies, for instance, who would dearly love to know absolutely everything about you before they do business with you, as would a future employer, for example, they say that they don't sell it to insurance companies, but what you're saying is that they sell it to people who sell it to insurance companies.
Well, I don't know about insurance companies, but we definitely know about these information intermediaries, and we know because on their websites, the information intermediary has to show up in what's called a data release register, which we got them to publish of the last time they tried something like this in 2014. So we look in those data release registers and you can see the named information intermediaries, and if you go to their websites, you can see the sorts of companies that they themselves are servicing. So as I say, I think, it's impossible for the patient to know who has ultimately got their data because they don't publish all of the customers of these information intermediaries.
And people might be thinking, well, what can they do with this information? But when information about people's medical records is melded with all the other information that is out there that you probably aren't even aware that companies hold on you, then you can profile a certain type of person based on, for instance, the car that they buy or the TV shows that they watch or what they've searched for on the internet. If you combine all of that with the sort of the holy grail, where the money is, which is your medical records, then you really do have something quite powerful in your hands, don't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's this environment, as you rightly describe. It's not just your medical records in isolation. It is profiling people. In fact, companies are trying to find out things about you, about your psychology, about your mental state, your emotional state all the time. Well, that's what's in your medical records. It's your physical health, but it's also your mental health and your sexual health. Many of the pieces of information that are proposed to be sucked up are actually highly sensitive codes, things about sexually transmitted infections or AIDS, HIV, or domestic violence or abuse. That is stuff that gets into your GP record for the obvious reason that you're trying to get help with those things. But if that then makes its way out amongst this, you've got some of the most sensitive information you can possibly imagine about people.
And what about the effect then between the patient and the doctor? If you have something that is potentially embarrassing, is it possible that people will not seek treatment or help for that for fear that will go on their record, which will then be sold on?
Well, you've hit it on the head, Nick, and this is what we have always said. This is not just about selling data, That's bad enough. What this is about is trust. And what we all understand about trust and about doctors is that there has to be this really secure trust at the heart of the doctor-patient relationship, because, exactly as you say, if you can't trust that what you tell your doctor will be kept in confidence, then you might not say something, and that could actually lead to your own harm to yourself if you've not revealed something, or possibly, as we're seeing in things like the pandemic, the wider public health. So, the harms here are very real, and they're to do with, the trust that is being eroded by not telling people what you're doing, not giving them enough information, and not giving them time to actually do what they can do, which is opt out.
Just before we get on to the opt-out, people might say, well, what difference does it make? These records are going to be anonymous, but the problem with that surely is that it's not actually anonymous, because your record isn't just thrown into a giant pile without your name on it. Your name is appended to it. Everybody's going to have a number which can be looked up in future if legally appropriate, I think is the phrase more or less that the government have used. Well,
yes,
the law can change from one day to the next, as we know.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the process that we're talking about, let's be very, very clear, because I think it's been slightly misleading. Some people have put out, well, we don't capture your names and addresses. They don't need to, Let's be very clear. What is going to be extracted from the GP record of every man, woman and child in England from the 1st of July this year, every single dated medical event that has been recorded in your GP record will be associated with your NHS number, your full postcode and your date of birth. And what they will do is obscure those with something called a pseudonym, with a piece of software that makes it basically not look like your NHS number. But when it gets up to the big database, they've got that software, they control that software, and can, as you say, in certain circumstances, they can turn it back. So there you have your NHS number, your full postcode, and your date of birth. And it is precisely those pieces of information that allow them to link across not just your whole GP history, those medical events taken from your GP record, but also your hospital history, those things that have been, treatments you've had in hospital. So it allows them to link all of this together. And that obviously, if it's to work, if it's to be useful, has to be at each individual patient's level. So if they can join all that stuff together, then clearly they can identify each individual patient within the data.
Right, so let's talk about opting out, because you say that July the 1st is when this is going to happen. Do people have a month to opt out? And if so, how do they do it?
Okay, well, it's not quite a month. So from the 1st of July is when the data begins to be extracted from GP practices across England. And NHS Digital itself, that's the body that will be extracting the data, says that in that case, if you want to prevent your GP data from being extracted, you need to get what's called a Type 1 opt-out. That's a form that's on the Med Confidential website. It's also on NHS Digital, although it's a little harder to find. And you need to send that form to your GP practice by the 23rd of June so that the GP has time to act upon your opt-out form. What they will do effectively is you give them your details and maybe your children's details, and then they apply a code to your GP record, and that means that your data will not be taken. Yeah? There is another opt-out.
All right, go on, sorry.
There is another opt-out, which is one that NHS Digital has. It won't stop NHS Digital from extracting all your data, but they say, if you tell us not to, we won't sort of sell on your data. Unfortunately, the evidence of years now of the process they've been using to sell this data shows that opt-out really isn't respected very much of the time. In fact, it's respected about 20% of the time. So it's not that one that you should really do if you're concerned about this. It's the one to your GP, and as I say, it's a form. It's on the Med Confidential website. It's on the NHS Digital's website, and it's called a Type 1 opt-out to your GP.
It sounds as though they made it as difficult as possible, while being able to say that they made it as easy as possible. You have to actually go to a website. I mean, you've said that the NHS version of it is hard to find, and then you have to fill out a form. What sort of form are we talking about here?
So, well, our one, we boiled it down to literally one side of A4, and if people have difficulties in printing one off, we're happy to post one to them. You can also ring up a number at the NHS Digital contact centre, although I don't believe they're open on bank holidays, and ask for them to post your form. But you're right, Nick. I mean, this is ridiculous. We're in a digital age. People's got the NHS app. You're able to send a sort of a repeat prescription to your doctor. Why couldn't you send a thing saying, look, I don't want my data to be extracted for these secondary uses, these further purposes? So, yeah, you're absolutely right. It seems to me like they've made it really a lot more difficult than they needed to. They could have, in fact, written to every patient, like they've done millions of times during the pandemic about stuff that's, frankly, been in all the headlines already. So why didn't they write to everyone and provide the form that they might need, and then give people the time to be able to make their own choice?
I bet that the majority of the people that are listening to this are hearing about this for the very first time. It seems extraordinary what is about to happen under a cloak of what looks from the outside to be a cloak of secrecy.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, this is the case. This is not the first time, by the way, that this has been attempted. Back in 2014, there was a program called Care.Data. And to kick that off, they sent out some junk mail leaflets. Again, they didn't write to every patient. They just sent junk mail leaflets that went in with everyone's pizza ads and what have you. That caused such outcry back then that the program had to be paused and ultimately stopped. So why in 2021 they think they can get away with doing even less to inform the public and be doing it in the middle of a pandemic where obviously GPs are very, very busy already. I mean, they're not only doing, the sort of care that they deliver during the pandemic, but they're part of the vaccination program. This seems outrageous to announce something on the 12th of May on a website. And as you say, it's like the Vogon Destructor Fleet. How do people find this out?
Well, it seems like the perfect time to bury something like this. So just in conclusion, people want... tell us again what form they want and where they can get it.
Okay, so if you go to medconfidential.org and you click on the How to Opt Out button, if you like, you will go to a page that has all of the forms that you need to be able to download. That's a Type 1 opt-out form to your GP. That's the one that you need to do by the 23rd of June in order to prevent your data being extracted. And, if you like, you can do the other opt-out. It's called a national data opt-out. And that one could be online for individuals, but again, it's forms for families with children and everything else. It's not particularly digital at all.
Good to talk to you, Phil. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Phil Booth, the coordinator of Med Confidential. That's MEDCONFIDENTIAL, Med Confidential, an organisation which campaigns to keep our medical information confidential.
Well, as I say, I watched Phil's video and I think whether I were eating my tea or talking to my wife about something else, and so I didn't really listen fully. But when I listened to this guy, I thought, no, he puts a different complexion on it totally. I think Phil went on down the lane of where he thinks it's setting the NHS up, going down the road to privatisation. And I think that's not exactly the worst kept secret, is it really? But this guy, he talked about your medical records and stuff like that, which some people might think, well, I've hardly had anything to do. Just like I've had emergency spinal operation, which has absolutely done me in because mobility is, I'm knackered in that department. But when he talked about what if you've got something that you would rather keep secret, like whether it's injuries down to domestic violence and even worse stuff like that, I thought, yeah, I never really thought about it that way. I suppose in a way I've gone from meh to, yeah, I think this could be quite serious. I suppose when they talk about profiling people, my Facebook page was just wall-to-wall propaganda from friends who were posting memes of Nigel Farage trussed up like St. George or the do it for Winston Churchill drivel. So yeah, it's sort of like put a different slant on it for me now. And I might actually do the same thing myself. I might actually fill in the form and opt out myself. But what do you guys think? Will you be doing the same? If you decide to do the same yourself, I'll leave a link in the description box below for you. Anyway, I shall leave the video here, and until the next time, I shall bid you farewell. So take care.